an army of 2.3 million India haters who live in a dreamland for whom there is only two things is to either be a mullah or pick up a gun.
So you said in an interview that you'll probably be born a few hundred more times, and every time you will be born, you want to join the foreign services. So, was this something you always wanted to do since childhood?
To be honest, yes and no. I come from a family of civil servants. My father was a civil servant. My uncle was a civil servant. And I was obviously interested in the civil services. And this, I'm not a zoomer like you. I mean, I'm ancient, as my children say, that I belong to the Stone Age. And at that time, there were only two choices, either civil services or medicine or engineering. And there was a sense of pride in being a civil servant. I saw how my uncle and father was treated. Uh, but then gradually, uh, it took time. I must confess that while I was doing my law degree, I kind of, and this was the pre-internet era. Remember, I mean, you will not remember, but we used to have pigeons and we used to fly a pigeon from one place to the other to send a message. You know that, right? No, I'm joking. There was still some civilization. So, anyways, so that is when I gradually the world started opening up when I was doing my law degree, and I started getting more interested, and here I am. I've been very fortunate to have had a fascinating career, very diverse. And yes, a Hindu is born or an Indian is born at least 1.84 million times or something like that. I've stopped counting. So I do intend to come back and haunt the world again as a diplomat. So that is my intention.
What were your first few years in training like, both in the country and abroad?
Difficult, frustrating, angry at my bosses. Even now, I meet some of the bosses and tell them that I used to kind of so dislike you, and now we are friends. Because no, actually, because when you're a young officer, you're piled on with work. And let me tell you a small anecdote. I was my first posting was Moscow, and one fine morning or evening, the temperature was minus 30 degrees. Minus 30. You will not appreciate what minus 30 is. And the Secretary General or the President of Russia, Soviet Union, in those days was dying. He was on the deathbed. But the only way to know when somebody of his stature had died was a news agency called TASS, TASS. So when TASS declared, like our PTI or ANI, so when the TASS declared somebody dead, he is dead. Even if he has died 10 days ago, and if TASS does not declare him to be dead, he's not dead. So I had a very serious responsibility, and the future of my nation was hanging on my, on my delicate shoulders. I was told to sit in front of the TASS machine, from 9 p.m. in the evening to 1 o'clock in the morning, 4 hours. Outside temperature minus 30. Heating in the building was not the best. They did not give me a car to drive me from my home to office. I mean, who gives a car to a third secretary, right? So I was driving myself, and I'm not exaggerating. Icebound roads, if you apply a brake, the car spins. Everything is very different. It's the skill to drive. And I was counting my blessings. I had never prayed so hard, but I actually had to apply a brake, and my car spun like a top. And then somehow it again straightened up. And for 4 hours, I was telling myself, I'm going to quit foreign service. This is no place for a human being. Why doesn't the Secretary General die? Let me go home. And the Secretary General refused to die on my watch. I let the nation down. And, he popped it within few hours when I handed over charge, that very responsible charge to another colleague. So, I mean, it is, but that I have come to believe that, it is when you put through the grind, like many of us have done, you learn things. And some of my bosses who I at that time hated, and they know it. I mean, now some of them I look up to. They are like my role models. So, but that is how the initial years were, and as time passed, it became that much more challenging, that much more easier. I mean, it's like being an intern in a company, and you're told to do some kind of meaning at times difficult jobs that nobody else wants to do, but good fun.
So till the 1980s or 90s, one had to really be on the top of the merit list to get into the IFS. So what do you think has changed now? Why do people choose? Yeah.
Yeah, very, very many reasons. One, the medium of examination has changed. You can, the catchment area, the section of the society which is joining the foreign service has changed. It has been democratized. Why not? And we were still lucky. The first flush of IFS officers were princes and nobility and royalty. I mean, if they had looked out of their graves, they look at us and say, "Arey, where have these jokers come from?" So nation has changed, and you have to have a service which represents the country. So that is one. Secondly, the uh, the attraction of travel, the attraction of meeting people, the fascination for foreign goods. When I was a young officer, officers who were 10 years my senior used to have a Toyota Corolla, for heaven's sake, in 85 in New Delhi. And all services, my colleagues of the service would look at them and say, "Oh my God," and I know what was going on there in their minds. So it was a different period altogether, right? And gradually things have changed. There are enough opportunities to travel, and there are hardships also in the foreign service. You leave your kith and kin, you get uprooted quite regularly. My children, who do not have too many complaints against me, or so I hope, one of the complaints that they have is that they don't know what home is. They are both studied in the US, and they're during the break, they would say, "Oh, we are going to our ancestral home." Oh, they don't know an ancestral home. So for them, home was me, and their education suffered. So, there are a bunch of reasons, but I mean, only if you are in the thick of it and you know what it is all about, because nothing in life is all good. I mean, it's a mixed bag. And as a mixed bag goes, the bag of tricks that foreign service is a delightful bag.
Some suggest that there should be a separate exam for the IFS or at least a separate interview. So what is your take on this?
No, no, no. You know, uh, in the normal circumstances, I think that would have been okay. But we are a very different country, and let's face it, the premier service is the Indian Administrative Service, and they form the rules. They amend the rules. They obey or do not obey the rules. I mean, basically, that is the iron frame or the steel frame or whatever frame you call it. Now, if you are linked with that stream of, I'm being brutally frank with you. I can give you an esoteric reason, but I will not do that. So, if you get delinked from that main examination, then obviously your standing gets impacted, and so it's very important that we continue to get, because you see, what difference will it make? Suppose you have a separate channel. How will it be any different? The same interview, the same process, but you learn, you're not born with those skill sets, you know. Let me tell you another small anecdote. When my first posting was Moscow, and in those days there used to be telexes. You would not have heard of a telex, you know. It went, yeah. God bless you. So I had to send a 3-line message, Shreya. I, honest to God, tell you, a 3-line message to Moscow head of chancellery from Vishnu Prakash, arriving with wife, son. I wanted to add dog, cat, but I didn't have a dog, cat on such and such date by such and such flight. Kindly arrange transport and reception. Looking forward to seeing you. That was the message. I wasted 10 sheets of paper, made 10 drafts, was nervous, and I told the secretary, the PA, personal assistant of one of my senior colleagues who was helping me send the telex, because I said, I don't know how our seniors, produce such copious literature and letters and articles and analysis. I cannot even write a 2-line telex. So he was 55 years old, who seemed to me ancient in those days. I was 25. He looked at me and said, "Sir, wait for 10 years. I'll ask you that question." You know, that man's face, I can never forget. So all I'm trying to say is that you learn on the job. Frankly, I learned on the job. I looked very closely at my seniors. I learned what not to do, because it's very important to learn what not to do. When you have been given grief, there are two ways. You say, all right, let me be senior and I'll kind of, take it out on hapless younger colleagues. Or you say, tell yourself that, look, I'm not going to do that. And there are 1,000 positives and you incorporate those positives. So that's how it is. I don't know whether I've answered your question, but I've tried to be brutally honest.
Can you share some anecdotes from each of the country that you've served in?
That's a tough order. I'll charge extra for that. But I've, it's great fun being in the service. Moscow was my first posting. It's my favorite. It is absolutely my favorite, because coming from India, I had never traveled abroad, and Russia and Soviet Union in those days there was, countries and a country called India for them. We were we were the toast of the town. Anybody, I mean, Indians could not do anything wrong. And there used to be a ZIL lane. Suppose there's a 5-lane highway. The middle lane was reserved for the members of the Politburo elite, and they had stretch limos, and they would zip in on that. No traffic lights, nobody. And then there was a small Nissan Sunny, red colored, belonging to a certain young officer who still had hair at that time, who used to be driving, on that ZIL lane. And the cops would come charging, and they were nasty. They would put the button, stop. How dare you do that? You had a dip plate. So they knew he was a diplomat. So where are you from? I said, India. Ah, Dawai. Dawai is go ahead, man. We had a son who was 1 year old. My wife would leave the stroller outside a shop because it was cold and it was sunny. Outside a shop, 1-year-old son. And you came back in 5 minutes and there were 5 ladies kind of pampering him and telling my wife what to do. I mean, I don't know whether Russians miss the Soviet Union. Frankly, I know it's politically incorrect. I've never said it earlier. I miss Soviet Union, for all the humane warmth that they had. I can go on. Now, let me fast forward. How much time? I don't know whether we are speaking to me. Okay. I was in a place called New York, posted in New York, when I got a midnight call from my office. Midnight, or rather 2 o'clock in the morning, because when you are at headquarters, you forget that there's a time difference. When you are in the embassy abroad, then you remember all that. So, and I was told that I've been sent for a very challenging assignment to Vladivostok as the Consul General. Vladivostok. I was 10 years in service. Anyway, 15 days after I was in Vladivostok, the first Consul General in the world, because Americans wanted to do it in style. They had a ship full of congressmen and seniors coming, and that ship had to dock on a certain date, and that was heralding the arrival of the Americans to Vladivostok. I had my 2 suitcases, my wife, child, daughter by then. And when they said, when is the consulate general being established? I said, I'm the consulate general, it's hereby established. So the Americans hated me for the rest of their lives. But anyway, that's not the story. I reached Vladivostok airport. I'm not exaggerating. It was like a village bus stand. An Indian village bus stand is a better place. They had just been hit by a tornado. Grass was growing on the tarmac. Things were absolutely in a state of disrepair. It was a wild east, but there was media at the ladder, as I descended. And so they asked me, Mr. Consul General, welcome to Vladivostok. You're coming from New York. Do you see any difference between New York and Vladivostok? So I looked around and said, Niet, takoije, I speak a bit of Russian, so I said, no, it's similar. I became a star for 48 hours. The media carried banner headlines, welcome Indian Consul General. He says New York and Vladivostok is the same. So good fun. And every place in the Foreign Service will tell you 1,000 stories, but maybe I'll reserve, if you want more, I'll kind of keep on weaving them in, but let us move on for a minute.
You have seen both USSR and post-breakup Russia. What was the difference like for the people?
Okay. Now, very good question. Imagine an aircraft carrier, huge battleship, cruising at 15 knots or 20 knots. And suddenly it's applied, told to brake and turn, make a U-turn. Battleships don't make U-turns very easily. It is a Herculean task. That is what happened to Soviet Union. This state woke up in the morning as a democratic state. They were disoriented. They had lost a sense of bearing. Things were in total mess. There was an identity crisis. Do you know, after the breakup for a few weeks, an apartment in Moscow apartment used to sell for $5,000, equivalent of $5,000, because the value of the ruble crashed. And an apartment which after 1 year was costing $500,000 was being sold for $5,000. People were impoverished overnight because they did not trust the bank. They kept money in the pillows or almirahs that went up the smoke. A proud nation was traumatized. They were adrift. And then Mr. Yeltsin was the president who did not help matters. So I would think that still Russia has to get over the trauma of becoming a huge country or kind of getting disintegrated. So it is not easy to bear that. And it is only Mr. Putin who has brought back a sense of identity, brought back pride. And for that, he has had to pay a heavy price because, frankly, the Western world believes in telling other countries, do as I say, not as I do. I mean, if I do that, I'm so and so. But how dare you behave like me, kind of a thing. There's an exaggeration, but I'm trying to drive a point here.
What do you think of the Indo-Russian relations at present, and does China have a role to play?
I would not credit China with that, or give them any credit or otherwise for that, because we have a very, the foundation of India-Russia relations is very strong. And if we strengthen it, it is up to us. If there's a bit of a cloud over it, it is something that we need to attend to. I believe that for our strategic leverage, it's very, very, very important for us to have the closest of ties with Russia. What has happened is that after the breakup of Soviet Union, and which was a challenge to India's foreign policy, because Soviet Union was one of our anchors, which gave us a lot of comfort and support politically, strategically, defense, and so on and so forth. Russia, after the breakup of Soviet Union, started looking west. So for about 10 years till Mr. Putin came, or 9 years, their orientation was towards the west. We also kind of started we also started balancing the relationship, because we have to. You cannot have a vacuum. In the meantime, the linkages started fraying a bit, because during the Soviet Union, so much went from India under the rupee ruble trade. There were so many contacts at various levels, but Mr. Putin's arrival helped in that we have the first annual summit that India has announced with any country, that was with Russia. So in 2002, we started a practice of annual summits. But then what has happened is that gradually India's economy has grown, India's ambitions have grown. We want to enlarge our footprint. We obviously want to expand our relations with all countries, which is in our interest. So our relations with the West have grown tremendously. With the US has become perhaps the most important partner of India. And meantime, Russia, as I mentioned to you, has a bit of bit of a complex and desire to be seen as the same power that Soviet Union was, which Russia is not. So Russia started drifting. They wanted to have their own leverage, and the West did not help, because by taking NATO to the doorsteps of Russia, while they started to engage Russia as well as constrict Russia. And Mr. Putin was not willing to accept that. So China is one country which is very happy to kind of step in whenever required. They don't believe in minor things called right and wrong. They don't believe in the rules of the game. I mean, they believe they have a mandate from heaven, and whatever they do is. By now, the things had shifted. China had become a bigger power than Russia, but Russia had no choice, because they had to enhance their own leverage or maintain their standing. So they kept on getting closer to China. We kept on getting closer to USA while maintaining good relations with Russia. So frankly, it's a game of leveraging. It's a game of looking after your interests. And when we say look after our interests with Russia, we have still have a very important defense and security cooperation in this field of energy, oil, space, nuclear technology. But that is where it is. It is not much more than not much of people-to-people links, not much of trade. So I think we have now done the right thing by instituting a 2+2 dialogue at the ministerial level. So you have an annual summit and you have a 2+2 dialogue, because when the defense ministers and the foreign ministers meet, I mean, it cannot get anything better. So we need to engage Russia more. Russia needs to engage India more, so that we can communicate at various levels. And but let's face it, we are two large countries. We have similar and different national interests. And the name of the game is to pursue your national interests and harmonize them to the extent possible.
Do you see India getting influenced by the Korean wave?
Korean wave? Oh, Hallyu?
Yes.
Hallyu, right?
Yes.
Have you been influenced?
No, my friends have.
Well, the day you get influenced, we'll talk about it. But you know, it is amazing. There was this Gangnam Style. You know, you've heard of Gangnam Style, that song, and which had taken the world by storm. The Hallyu is, you know, that is something that has been enjoyed by so many countries, by China, by Japan. India's Northeast has taken to Hallyu a very big time. Korean movies are amazing. They are quite similar to Indian movies. There is a mother-in-law, there is a horrible father-in-law, there is a daughter-in-law suffering, and so on and so forth. I am kind of exaggerating, but it is something that we can relate to. And there is a lot of, and by the way, don't tell anybody, this is a top secret I'm revealing on your program. I am very fond of my Korean friends.
What was your experience like in Pakistan?
Oh, I love, no, I would have gone and said something. Okay, serious, very good question. You know, for any Indian diplomat to experience Pakistan and China is almost a must. So unless you have experienced Pakistan, you do not know what uh, this cerebral neighbor of us is all about. I'm choosing my words very carefully. You know, once Musharraf said when he was the president that 85% of Pakistanis are moderate people, and I don't think that the esteemed general knew what he was saying. 99% of Pakistanis are wonderful people. 99%. But it is the 1% that is the problem. And if you look at the 1%, what does it mean? It's a country of 220 million people, 230. So basically, 2.3 million radicals. You know, imagine an army of 2.3 million India haters who live in a dreamland, for whom there is only two things, is to either be a mullah or pick up a gun. And there is a visceral hatred for India. All you have to do is to see how Indians are caricatured. And somehow this country, they have tried to create an identity of not India. Anything that is India is bad. And the real power rests with the army, which does not have to contest any elections. So unfortunately, they have been on a path uh, which was best described by an American diplomat, that Pakistanis were very good at shooting themselves in the feet. Now they have gotten better. They have learned to load the revolver faster. So, I mean, that is in a general way. I had gone with my eyes open. Uh, I mean, they were reasonably decent to me as far as, because they knew that I'm a career diplomat, that I belong to some very secret, very, very secret service they never got to know. Again, I think I've spoken out a bit too much. But uh, yet they gave me a hard time. I was not allowed to settle down for 3 months. I was constantly shadowed by friendly ISI people, friendly in quotes. No, they were decent. They were decent. Let me not exaggerate. So much so, I have an anecdote to share with you. I mean, you know, one evening I had to go out for dinner, and I could not find the way to the house. Islamabad is like a village, but my sense of direction is so good that if I have to go from one room to another in my house, I lose my way. I mean, imagine traveling to another place. So my ISI friends could not take it anymore. I mean, poor people were hungry, were tired, they were kind of trailing me. So one motorcycle zipped in front of me, came and stopped. And he came out and said, you understand a bit of Hindi? So he says, tells me, Janab, आपने उधर जाना है, उस घर में जाना है. so, so I was very tempted to hug that man and say, thank you very much. But you know, you are not expecting welcome with the tilak and mala and ghanti when you go to Pakistan, but it is very, very important to go to that country, to see the contradictions, to understand and feel the visceral hatred that they have for Indians, and all that romantic notions about bhai bhai, behan behan, padosi padosi, whatever is for the birds. I mean, I'm not a fan.
As an officer, of course, later as an ambassador, but also as any IFS officer, you actually become India. So how does one deal with that thrill and challenge?
That is a high, my dear. That's a high. I mean, you are India. You, whatever you do, you talk, you behave, and especially, I mean, not just as an IFS officer, not just as an ambassador, even at a junior level, at a younger level. So that is very intimidating and so gratifying. So gratifying. You know, you used to go in Moscow of Soviet days to a shop, Soviet days, and suddenly they would start playing Awara Hoon. Actually start playing in the store Awara Hoon. And you would say, oh my God. I mean, uh, that feeling I cannot describe to you. I can only feel, I can only relate to that. And there is a lot to be proud about India. And the stock of India is growing, the stature of India is growing. Uh, and therefore, I want to come back and in my next life and life thereafter and be a foreign service officer again. When you will be a minister of external affairs, so please give me a good posting.
So are diplomats born or are they made?
It can be both nature and nurture. Nature helps, but as I say, success is 95% perspiration and 5% inspiration. Similarly, I think being a diplomat is 95% of effort and learning and nurturing. But certainly your pedigree helps. If you have a good exposure, it helps. Uh, but at the end of the day, it's your caliber. And coming from a good background can open the door for you. But being able to be rise up in that room and be heard, it depends on your caliber.
So I'll come to my last question. What would be
Thank
your
God.
message? What would be your message for young officers stepping out into the world?
Who have already joined the foreign service or wanting
Yes,
to join the foreign service?
both actually.
Okay. Before then, let me come to the first part of, because I also mentor youngsters and I'm also on the mock interview boards and address them, the civil services aspirants. It is very important to learn two things. One, be a good listener. A diplomat has to be a good listener. Mikhail Gorbachev, the president of USSR, used to say, "You learn from the ears, not through the mouth." And I am afraid we Indians keep our ears very often shut and another part of the anatomy open. I'm talking of the mouth, and that is not the best thing to do, because listen, uh, learn to listen, imbibe. As they say, a speaker of the parliament is the person who speaks the speaks the least. I've been a spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs. A spokesperson should also know not when not to speak. So, second thing is that one has to learn the art of precision, being precise, so that you can, and it comes with time. It is not impossible. I always tell my young colleagues who are my young friends who are aspiring for it, that take up a issue, do pose a question, give a two-line answer, then question that two-line answer, then again give a response. So have a dialogue with yourself, because very often things are taken at face value. What you see on the surface is not reality. Learn to have an inquisitive mind and be open to different stimulus, different cultures, different facets. We are a great civilization, but there are other great civilizations also. So, and for my young diplomats, let me, before that, I'll tell you one very big difference between my times and now. I mean, as I keep telling you that I belong to a different era. Now about 40% of the young officers are women officers. And I every year almost go and address them in the Foreign Service Institute. And I'm proud to say the young lady officers are any day outshine the boring men officers. And I am so proud to see the lady officers doing what they are doing. They are at the forefront of interacting, very cerebral, because they have put in that extra effort to come up. And I see that chutzpah, the drive, the ambition, and that is something that invigorates me always. But the only message for them is, please remember that the 17th century or 18th century saying that and those days it was said an ambassador or a diplomat is the man, because there were no women diplomats, who is sent out, is the honorable man or something like that, who is sent out to lie for the country. That thing is gone. Today, you are as good as your credibility. And you are in a digital era. Anything that you say can be fact checked within 2 minutes. And once the impression goes out that you are flexible with facts, I think your credibility and efficacy takes a hit. So they have a lovely job on their hand. They represent a great country called India, but please make sure opinions are yours, facts are sacrosanct. And it is very, very important to build a credibility. And last thing, which I always mention to everybody, is that please have a dose of vitamin P. That I will tell you later in the next program, if and when. Oh, let me tell you now. Vitamin P is punctuality. And that is not the biggest forte of Indians, and I can say that since I'm an Indian, I can be critical, but the world respects people who are punctual.